Greetings, shippers. Welcome back, and it's time for another episode of Fanversations. Today, we're joined by Fatima, and we're going to talk about Yaoi slash BL. That, of course, being boys' love. We're going to talk about it as a genre, history, tropes, casual outside viewing, and getting really in-depth, just everything. It's gonna be a fun discussion. As always, follow me on social media to stay up to date, and hit that bell notification so you never miss a video. Because you know there's always new ships, new vids, live streams, all kinds of things coming. There's lots of history and interesting recs coming up, so let's get into it. Greetings, shippers. It's Sasha here with...
Fatima. Hi.
And you reached out because you wanted to talk about something specific. You wanted to talk about Yaoi, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting subject because it's like, after reading like kind of fiction from the Western people and seeing like the usual stories, it's very interesting that the difference.
So elaborate on that. What are some of the differences that you notice?
Well, some of the difference, I think there may be that for some reason there's lots of media for yaoi specific, like there's some anime, not that much, but there's some anime. There's tons of manga which are comics, and there's some CD dramas which I don't think we really have here in the west part of the world. Even some movies, but for example, in most of the stories, like for some strange reason, there's 20 men and 3 women, if there's any. The other thing is like, it's very interesting because, for example, in many of the cases, the main characters won't be like won't be gay. They just happen to fall in love with somebody of their same gender, or even if it's like recently I think there have been more like he's gay, this is his story, but at the beginning I think like it's more that a circumstantial thing than anything else. Also, originally, it tends to be a lot more tragic. The endings will be like heartbreaking and things like that. It's pretty much in the sense of the classic romance literature, like everything ends in blood, tragedy, and death. And but the main difference I think that is with like the Western media is that I have no idea why, but this is like a trope in the gender, like the consensual is not always so clear. Like it is usually like in the beginning of the story, like for whatever reason, the sex may start like something not so much consensual, and that's like the main difference I have noticed. Like, it's very odd.
It's very interesting because there are some stark cultural differences between actual yaoi and then... Well, there are a couple of differences. For one thing, lots of people over here conflate the term yaoi with how we use it in the West, which is often as a fandom term. People just use it in the same way they would use slash or male, not realizing that in other parts of the world it's actually, like you said, a genre. It's a specific, actual type of media with its own tropes and its own ways of doing things. That's not just a fan creation, but we tend to use the words interchangeably. And also because it is a genre coming from a different place in the world, it conforms to those different cultural expectations. Like, for example, with them not being explicitly out, it could potentially be because the way that Japan deals with homosexuality is very different than how the West deals with it, and that is definitely reflected in its media. The same with consent, because there's a very huge difference between, for example, Western pornography and Japanese pornography, and the way that they handle consent is a huge part of that, like based on what each culture views as sexy or appealing, and they're very different. And that can definitely translate into how relationships are portrayed within the media itself. But then when it comes across, I think, and people pick it up, it can be a bit difficult to get one's head around it if one is expecting a more Western style type of story or romance. And then on top of that, it also gets caught up in the idea because people use it as a fandom term that it's a bit less legitimate. So sometimes it feels that people look down on yaoi a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. But the thing with yaoi in specific, it's that, well, in Japan, for instance, it doesn't call yaoi because it's kind of derogative. The name of the genre is BL, which
Mm-hmm.
stands for boys love.
Yes.
Um, because yaoi started like I don't remember, like around the 70s. Just as a fandom thing, like group of fans will like get together and make doujinshi, which are like fan magazines, like
Yes.
fans comics, um, about their favorite series or manga or whatever, and they will portray the characters as gay or as circumstantially having a bromance, and that's the way that it started. But after some time, around I think the 80s or something, it starts like being like a legitimate genre on its own.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it started kind of weird. But even like the way they call the fans of yaoi, for women it's fuyoshi, and
Yes.
for men it's fudanshi, which
Mm-hmm.
means like rotten girl or boy,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of weird. It's not so good if you ask me.
I
Uh,
think they've tried to reclaim it though. It's one of those words that I think people do try and reclaim and use proudly, even though in its core actual root meaning of the word it is pretty derogatory.
yeah, I think so too. Like I have to some there's a series that's called like Fudanshi Koko Seikatsu, that it's like the life of a high school student that it's a Fudanshi, and and when he meets a girl that it's also a Fuyoshi, and they're like, "Oh, you're my rotten partner," and things like that. It's very funny. I like also I think that people are trying to reclaim it, but yeah, like if I looked at the root, it's like that's kind of uncomfortable. Yeah, it's very interesting because yeah, for sure the stories are not uh that that close to Western style. Like for instance, in yaoi manga,
Mhm.
the characters have very specific roles. They're like the seme,
And the uke, yeah.
the uke. In some, not much, will be asuke, which can play both roles. But in most of the manga, there's just these two things, and like in Western media, it's kind of a balance of power for saying something like.
It definitely hasn't translated well in recent years either, because there was a while a few years back, maybe a decade so, in Western fandom where we had a similar uke and seme thing happening in fandom with the top bottom dynamic that was very popular in a lot of the works. But recently, the top bottom has very much fallen out of favor, and so it's almost a way that you can tell when someone is coming from a more anime style fandom if they a use those terms or b are still interested in portraying that dynamic. And it's interesting because a lot of people are less willing to accept that dynamic nowadays, but it still can be an interesting way to tell a story and deal with these specific tropes, because in a way it is a trope more than an actual representation of how one expects a relationship should play out in real life.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I really like more this, and maybe because I consume tons of Asian media, I really do prefer this dynamic because it is easier for you to understand a certain character, like reducing his world a little bit. Like, yeah, like the top or semi will like usually kind of like this, the uke would like act like this, and they have like this play around the how can they go, because there are like several types of seme and several types of uke, and they're kind of mixed together depending on which are which. Oh yeah, it's kind of interesting. Also, I don't feel like media should reflect always like the real way you will see a relationship. I mean, I love some novels
Mm-hmm.
that are yaoi, and they're awful. Like the relationship, it's so sick. So I don't know. It's not a healthy one, but I love it. It's a really good story.
No, there are so many different ways to tell the stories of a relationship, and realistic is just one of many because there are so many different genres, so many different ways to take it. And in a way, that's the beauty of media, both official and fandom based, because you can explore all of these different scenarios that you really couldn't in a lot of ways in the real life because, well, a, it just wouldn't happen, and B, a lot of them are potentially problematic. And so this is a very good way to work through a lot of them in a safe environment and oftentimes a fun environment.
Yeah, I think like for most of the women that like yaoi and stuff, it's like a way they can explore these odd fantasies, because a lot of manga is very odd, by not feeling like at, really attached to them, like it's talking about them because it's just talking about some random guy that happens to be like in that situation.
Mm-hmm. So how do you feel then about people who make claims that women specifically who enjoy yaoi are just in it for the fetishization of the men? Like, how do you feel about that?
I think that it's like the same that saying that all men that play video games with like women with huge breasts and almost no clothing, it's like just for the fetish. Maybe they like the game, maybe they like to see it. Like for sure, many women may watch it just because of like the aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. I mean, some of them are gorgeous. Like the drawings are beautiful, um, and and there are some that are in them for like the story. Like for example, this series that I told you about just now, like the Fudanshi one.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's explaining to his friend, like, because he says like I'm not gay, just like one day I pick up a BL manga by accident, and I was reading it and I was like, oh, this is just interesting, and then he got hooked up with the genre. That also may happen.
No,
Like,
it's true. Sometimes you find yourself gravitating towards something, and there's just something about it that appeals to you, and it's not necessarily fetishistic or negative, but there's just something about the type of story that can draw a person to it. And you never know what type of person is going to be drawn to it either, because while there are lots of women who are drawn to it, there are also a lot of different people who are drawn to it too, and that's often not given as much attention because they do get very caught up in the Fujoshi stereotype of things,
yeah,
and
exactly.
they just stay there kind of.
Yeah, exactly, totally. Like for sure, there's a bunch of stories that would be classified as plain pornography, really, because they doesn't really have a story. But there's so many stories that are so good, and the thing with yaoi is, for example, that against shoujo, for example, that it's more towards romance and
Mm-hmm.
girls and stuff like that. The yaoi moves so much quicker. In fact, that's something that is also very kind of fun about it, because it's like um, the yaoi will usually tends to break to three, let's say, genres. Like when it's very soft and just like romantic and maybe a kiss or something in the whole manga, it's called shonenai, which is like um, young young boys love, like something like that, like teens love. Then will be like yaoi, and then it will be bara, that is usually called like men's love, and that specific type of manga is usually drawn by men. It's much more rough and like in your face and stuff like that. But for example, like yaoi for in specific tends to be super explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Like so for in the story, the protagonists may have already have relationships, but they because they're Japanese still, they will be super ashamed of kissing in public or even holding hands
Mm-hmm.
outside of their home. So it's like very funny because I'm always thinking like, do you realize that just a moment ago, like, really? Like holding hands is a big issue here.
So how did you find yourself getting into it? Like, how did you get into yaoi and just the whole stuff in general?
Okay, like probably I start like getting into it because of the aesthetics. It was kind of an accident, really. Uh, I like in I don't know how it's called in Canada, but middle school, junior
Yeah.
high, like whatever. Uh, I was watching like tons of anime, and I found myself watching Ona High House Club, which is a reverse harem,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all these pretty guys like um, making a host club, which is like girls go there to take coffee with them and eat with them, and that's kind of the business, like in the cafeteria. And each one of these guys have like a trope, a selling point
Yeah,
that
they're all archetypical.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
exactly. And there's these two twins that their selling point is like their forbidden love. And I was like, the first time I saw it, I was like, what did just happen here? But while I keep watching the series, because obviously they're not the only characters, I was like, okay, I think I'm getting what those girls are screaming about now. Because they just look so cute, and the phrases were like, oh, take care of yourself, because if something happened to you, I will be alone in this world, and things like that. And it was so ridiculous and so cute at the same time that it was like, okay, maybe I should give this a try. And then I watched Gravitation, which was like just a fun romance to follow around. The characters were interesting and stuff, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of cute. And I keep watching some of them with my other animes, and then I found like I don't know which one was first, like Fuyu no Semi, Winter's. How do you say semi in English? I don't know. Like it's this little insect that makes noise like and
Well, like a
dies.
cricket or like.
Something like a cricket, but not a cricket. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's because my native language is not Spanish. I live in Mexico, so it's Spanish. So I think like cigarra, but I don't know how to say that in English. Really. Well, anyways, or it was Aino Kusabi, and both are like very tragic stories, which I like. And they're very interesting. There's so much like the Fuyu no Semi one is like one historical about the 18 something in Japan when they like stopped having a shogunate, like they stopped having a shogun, and they were open at last to the world, and like the transition in that. It's a very interesting story, and the other one is more like a sci-fi one, like very much like a happy world. They have this planet, and they're divided in classes, and like the top ones don't mess with the bottom ones and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. And it's also very interesting to see. It's like, in fact, of that one, I think I have where it is. Yeah. like the last novel here, like, and they're like the drawings are gorgeous, really,
Mm-hmm.
and the story is so much so cute. Not that's not a cute story. That's an awful story. That's the one I was telling you. I love this, but these two are totally messed up. Yeah, like I was about to say, like it's a really cute story. No, it's not a cute story. It's a good story, but not a cute one.
So, do you think then that a lot of traditional yaoi tropes, both in the actual genre and the fiction from it, do you feel that they match with a lot of the current trends in more Western fiction tropes? Because I feel that sometimes there's a bit of a clash. Like, it's not only the uke seme stuff, but it's also that over here we have the, kill your gaze trope, which often applies to when the romance goes very tragic and the queer characters are killed off. And a lot of times that happens in yaoi. So sometimes I wonder if by the examination by a lot of what is currently popular in the more Western discourse, if yaoi loses out a lot because it doesn't conform to what's currently being discussed over here. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that because like for Yao it's just a trope, like the way that they prefer to like tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
And here in the West, it's more like, for example, yeah, like kill that of the queer characters all suddenly die or
Mm-hmm.
tragically die more than that. uh, in Japan, will be like, yeah, if the manga is towards that, for sure it will end pretty bad. But here it's so fancy, like, oh, it's because they're queer characters and the heteronormativity and stuff, and it's like, not really, it's just like the way the story flows.
A lot of times I feel that lots of queer characters, women characters, and people of color characters, a lot of the times why they end up dying so often is because they are side characters. And a lot of times in media, the fate of the side character is just the quick death for emotional shock value. It's not safe to be a side character. If you are not the main character and do not have the main character protection, it is not a safe spot because you can die at any time to increase the drama of the story. It's not a safe place to be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And because of Yaoi, that like the main characters are queer, like in Yaoi it's not even safe being the main character. There is a manga and also have a movie. In fact, I saw the movie first. That's called Boys Love,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like the thing I start sewing in there is like, you have these two characters, they meet up, stuff like that. They have like kind of a good relationships and stuff, but one of them has like this tragic past. Most of the time, some of the characters of the yaoi characters will have this huge tragic past, and it will be like so sad and stuff like that. And in the end of the story is like all end up in tragedy because of that past. And I think that that's like a really common thing to do in a yaoi story.
It happens a lot in Asian tropes in general, though, like just in romance in general. Because I like to watch a lot of Japanese and Korean dramas, and I've seen tons where it's she's got a secret heart disease and she can't have too much happiness, and if she has too much happiness, her heart will literally explode. And I've seen tons of those, and then of course at the end, she has too much happiness and then she dies. But I watched them all the way through. But that's just how the trope is. It's very
Yeah,
much just playing through the narrative. Like that's just how it goes.
yeah, that's like what I was trying to say. Is like it's not because of its yaoi, it's because it's Asian. Like Asian loves drama.
Yes, and there are different types of media and tropes that are appealing to different parts of the world. Like there are different storytelling devices and ways to form a narrative that are more popular in different parts of the world. Like for example, Bollywood doesn't do this quite as much anymore, but when they integrated the musical sequences into everything, that's not popular over here, but it's very popular over there. And so for a lot of more Western viewers watching it, it's like, why is this happening? But it's a very appealing part of the storytelling for those viewers. So that is, you can't I don't think you can take away for what is contextually pleasing for another culture or group based on your own expectations, based on what would be more appealing for where you're coming from in the world. I don't think it's necessarily the most fair way to critique a work.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, what I have seen a lot in Asian media is like they doesn't need really a like super close ending. They like to, and then everything ends, and the
Mm-hmm.
story you're like, but what happened with this and what happened with that? Or when there is a like close story, is like it ends with tragedy or something. And I think that for us Western viewers, like the first time you get to that, it's like, what just happened?
Yeah, there's more of a penchant for enjoying a wrapped up story where you know what happens to everybody. I've seen tons of series actually end with the the flash forward to the future of what everybody is doing and how they're living and everything, and you see everybody. But I think it's also important to note that there are critiques of some of the things that people talk about over here in their own home countries on their own forums, but they're often not spotlighted and they're often taking place, on their own versions of Facebook and their own languages. And so they don't make it over here. So it can be more difficult for people to find out exactly what people are saying about these works in their host countries. And so there's a lot of assumptions I find that go on. But speaking of, do you find that for BL and Yaoi, do you find that the actual genre works are closer to the fan fiction? Like, do you find there's a lot of difference between them, or are they very close because of its fanficky origin?
Um, well, they're close. Of course, they're different because obviously, like the doujinshi stay like being for just fun entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to see like characters that will usually uh, be one way, change totally. But yeah, in the core, I think that the tropes like the semeuke dynamic and these mm, not so clear consensual relationships, and like even sometimes the shota of this, like the the way that they treat like the relationship since a very young age, like
Mm-hmm.
15 or something. There's very close, like they have so much tropes in common. The difference is like the way the story advances. It's kind of different because obviously when you take a character that it's already done, like already designed, has its personality and stuff, you have to follow certain things or just throughout say it like, yeah, this is just his face, and
Mm-hmm.
everything else would be different. But yeah, like for instance, many of the like important yaoi mangakas or writers, they came out from making doujinshi, and they like will the companies will like look at, throughout lots of different doujinshis and say like, yeah, this girl have something, so they will call her
Mm-hmm.
and just start to do her own story. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so many cases like that. For example, one of the more I don't know known writers right now is, it's Nakamura, I think, the one that wrote like Yunjo Romantica.
Okay.
It's Shungiku Nakamura. Yeah, yeah, no, Shungiku Nakamura. She wrote Yunjo Romantica, and because it has its anime, it has 3 seasons, I think, and the manga is still going on. Like it have already 12 volumes, and it's still going on from
Mm-hmm.
since like uh, 2006. And after Yunjo Romantica, like within that universe, they start like Yunjo and something else, and you have like these other couples that lives in this same world, so they eventually kind of cross paths, uh, and stuff like that. And because of that, she has made like Yunjo Mystique and Yunjo Egoist and Terrorist and even Sekaiichi Hatsukoi, which doesn't like, because it's in another environment. Like the Junjo ones are like surrounding this writer, and the Sekaiichi Hatsukoi it's like surrounding an editorial environment, but they're
Hmm.
also sharing the same world. And because her worlds intertwine so much, and both Junjo Romantic and Sekaiichi Hatsukoi has its own animes and stuff like that, it has become super popular. And I think like that's like really interesting, because people are like, oh yeah, the story like that, or like you can explore within one single author like
Hmm.
many types of relationships. You have this one like very conflictive, and this one that it's super tender, and things like that. And but she like came out from doujinshi competition or something like that. Like she started as doujinshi makers, even not just like the authors that are writing yaoi came from that place. For example, I think you should know like Captor Sakura,
Hmm.
Clamp, the group that made that. Like it also came from a doujinshi group at first. That's why they always have like these kind of gay relationships in the backgrounds, or maybe there are more than friends in so much of their works, because they came from that. They start making doujinshi, and then they were like, yeah, we can make our own stories.
I think it's so cool how that crossover can happen. I know that's the dream of a lot of people. You know, you do your work and it ends up being discovered. So it's really neat to see that level of crossover because it's so hard to break into the comic industry over here. It's extremely difficult. So it's very interesting to see that these fan works can be accepted to such a point where you can actually end up producing official works because that over here there's still a very interesting relationship between fan works and the official work, a kind of a competition, a bit of a barrier. And while I know that doujinshis aren't exactly legal or over there or anything like that, but they're a bit more accepted kind of because they have those conventions and you have the authors who are coming from it, and it's very different from over here where there almost seems to be a bit more of a barrier, an attempt to keep them more separate, to keep the official art official and the fan art as fan art. So it's just a very different environment I find to have stuff coming up
Yeah, totally, and not just for BL, just in, I
in
don't know,
general.
Korea or China or whatever, but in Japan in general, that's very much the case. For example, also like a lot Evangelion, that it's from Gainax, and Gainax, like we're seeing, like people really love the show, and we don't produce enough of the things that people want to buy, and people want to do their own stuff, and they will give each year different persons permission to like make products of the characters of their characters while following certain rules. So that way they ensure that even if that doesn't produce earnings, say earnings for them, their character won't get changed a lot. There will still be its character, and that they saw it as a way of repaying fans for being so enthusiastic, because in Japan it's super common that you make these your self-arm models and that you produce your own toys because fandom.
It's a really great way to make fans feel included and yet retain, like you said, retain that level of control because that way fans do feel listened to and valued, but at the same time you don't have completely just this is my 1920s Angel AU of this character and all of that stuff, which can really take the character off base. Then you end up with something like 50 Shades of Grey, and you're sitting there like, how did we come to this? But it's really it's interesting. How about, so you're really into yaoi? What about Yuri? Do you ever venture down that path or?
Yeah, like I have seen like a couple of anime, but I haven't seen that much because I don't get the stories really. I saw like I don't know the name. I really don't remember. But I saw this anime which was super crazy. Like really, the start was a bit ridiculous. This boy was like outside his town, just walking around, and spaceship just crashing on top of him. So the aliens in the spaceship was like, "Oh, we have to save him. We almost killed him." So they start healing him, but they don't really know humans, and they mess up, and they turn him into a girl. So obviously he has this girl that he likes, and because of tropes, he has this childhood friend that is in love with him. So you see like how the relationship start working now that he is a girl, he's a she, and stuff like, and that was fun to watch. But it was like, yeah, I don't really get the story. And then I saw like Magical Girl Lucena, no, Revolutionary Girl Lucena, yeah, like, and I was like, I'm not sure what happened here. This is so complex. In fact, that one I want to see it again, like, because I saw it many years ago. I mean, I start watching anime now like 12 years ago or something. So Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant maybe 9 years ago. Yeah, I should watch it again, because when I watched it first, I was like, yeah, I don't really get what's going on with the
Yeah, I
story.
saw it when I was young too. It definitely bears repeat viewing because there's a lot of symbolic stuff happening in the background that when you're just watching it when you're young, it's like I don't understand. But when you come back to it as an adult, it's like, oh, I got you. Okay, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, like, and there's so much series that are like make to the, like, you have to watch them very through, like, for you to understand it. Like, for example, also the first time I saw Evangelion, like the last 2 3 episodes, I was like completely lost. Like, what did just happen here?
Evangelion is a bit different too because like some of that symbolism was just in there because he thought it looked cool. And he admitted that. There are some interviews where he's like, well, what was up with the Christian symbolism and all that stuff? And it was just because it looked cool.
Yeah, yeah, not more than the symbolism. I had like troubles with the psychological part of the series, and I was like, I like that series quite a lot. So I was reading like some interviews with him, and he was like, yeah, I really felt bad in that time, so I made Evangelion to like kind of self therapy, to explore my own soul and things like that. And I was like, you're really messed up. I have never found like Yuri that's just self watching and super entertaining just for the sake of it. Like I found some Yaoi, for example. Gravitation is not, it's a good series, but it's just entertaining, plain entertaining. And with Junior Romantic, I also feel like you can watch it and enjoy it and don't be super pressure about anything. In contrast to, for example, Fuyu no Semi or Ainokusabi or whatever tragic story that it's really heavy to you to watch. Like, if you're into the genre at that point and you watch them, it's like, yeah, it's a very good series and very enjoyable. But if that's like your first approach to the series, it's like, well, back off, please.
Do you find that there's more BL being produced now than there was before, or about the same amount,
No,
kind of?
yeah, for example, when it started, because it started as like fan thing, um, there was just this one magazine called June producing it. In fact, because Yaoi was kind of derogative, like, for meaning that it doesn't have like a climax or conflict or just any meaning really. The most of the people use the name of the magazine to talk about it, like they call it June. But in the 90s, I think, give it or take it, um, there start other magazines there start to do more works and things, and they were like, yeah, we really need a name that doesn't associate with just one magazine. So they start like telling BL it's fine. So that's
Hmm.
the summary of the genre, so it's fine. Yeah, and there has been more works. I mean, if you compare it with shoujo or with shonen that have like all the life being there, obviously there's so many, so less, much less work. It's like I don't know if it there's like, for saying a number, just like 100 yaoi animes, there will be 1,000 yaoi animes, or 10,000 other media animes like shoujo or whatever.
Hmm.
But it has been increasing because um, I would thought really that it wasn't such a common thing to like, but just in November from last year, like here in Mexico, we have some anime and manga and comic conventions, and in November it was a yaoi convention. It was specifically just for yaoi fans, and it was pretty fun. There come some cosplayers that make like yaoi cosplays, and they were selling like here in Mexico. I don't think they have produced any like print anything about apart from Gravitation in
Hmm.
manga, in yaoi manga, but they will bring like this yaoi manga from Spain. To be in Spanish, and they will be like produce yaoi here in Mexico and things like that. It was very interesting to watch, really. Um, and I was like, the convention was, because it was for one genre specifically. They said like, yeah, one day will be enough because usually they're 3 days. And they sold out the tickets beforehand. Then they were like, okay, we will give you 2 days then. And was like, yeah, so people really like it. Cool. And in Japan also, like, the Comiket, that is like this big manga event, have like its own part from doujinshi, and it's super common. Like most of that doujinshi is yaoi,
Hmm.
really. So yeah, I think like the market has been expanding little by little because people really enjoy it, like in general. And I watch here. I would thought that here in Mexico will be more um like it would be very few men in the convention because we have we have like this very macho culture, so it's kind of fun. But there were obviously there were more girls, obviously,
Hmm.
but there were a lot of guys, like
Hmm.
a lot. And I was like, oh, that's interesting too.
That's the fun thing about conventions is you really get to see the people, and it's a fun way to put more of a face to a fandom, and you realize like who's in the fandom with you, and it's very interesting, and to see that, oh wow, there actually are like a decent amount of men here, or older people here, or younger people, and that can make it a lot of fun. And then even when you leave the convention and go back into your fandom, you're so much more aware of what the makeup of the fandom is, and that's part of the great thing about cons, I find.
Yeah, for sure. Like I in that convention in specific, I saw like just kids. I don't know, a 10, 11 year old kid boy with her sister, like maybe she was 13 or something, but they were like little, and obviously there was like their parents. Um, and I was like, and the kid was really excited about the cosplayers and things like that, and I was like, oh, cute. And because, for example, in other conventions, like in the TNTs, like the anime one, I have seen like entire families just cosplayed out like as Dragon Ball characters or
Hmm.
whatever characters, and it's super fun. But I kind of get that, like the parents are like otaku or something, and the kids. When you grow up with something like that, you kind of get into it eventually.
Hmm.
But with the yaoi one was like, it really looks like they're here because the boy wanted to be here. So it's pretty funny. It's like, oh, that's cool. I mean, I hope he's just not reading something very explicit, but whatever he likes. When it comes to shonen ai, there are like many stories that are very interesting and just any age appropriate.
Yeah, there's a lot of coming of age stories because there tends to be a lot of focus on high school and that kind of genre in general. A lot of things take place around that time period for a lot of the stories. So there are
Yeah.
a lot more, I find, gentle coming of age stories where people are just discovering their interests themselves, their romantic inclinations, and it's nice. It's a nice genre in general too, because there's not, I find, at least up here, there's not as much of it. Or when we do young adult, it's often more we have our own type of drama that we like to focus on. It's very, all these teens are out of control, they're doing all the drugs, they're sleeping with all the people, and there's a lot less of that gentle, like, oh, I'm a teenager, I'm finding myself, less slower paced stuff, I find over here.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think that's like just how Japan's like see, because um they're much more calm people in general. Like, there's drugs and there's sex and there's all the
Yeah.
stuff that we have here, but it's like in a much lower tone. I should say. Like, for example, I have seen, not just in Yaoi, like in general, when they're like this trouble kid, it's just because he doesn't really go to all his classes, or maybe he smokes, or even he dye his hair. Like, he wants to be blonde, so he dye his hair, and that's a huge problem for them. He's like out of control. And it's so funny because, like, yeah, here you could dye your hair blue and it wouldn't be that much of a deal.
No one even like bats an eyelash anymore. It's not, because it's not to say that there aren't real cultural problems, like, the boys who are locking themselves in their rooms and just not coming out. Like, there definitely are, but it's just the way they manifest in media is very different, because especially over here in the West right now, there is that big push towards, it's interesting because there is a big push towards more representative media, but then at the same time, we do still have all of our over the top, very not realistic shows when it comes to, the teens, or even, I don't know if we have a word for what we call our LGBT programming, but it's having a bit of a harder time getting off the ground in the mainstream here. And I think that might be part of the problem, is that it is trying to be mainstream, and it's very difficult to make anything mainstream against the already established genres, and it takes a long time. And even yaoi isn't necessarily what you would call mainstream, and it's still very much in its own corner doing its own thing, and it's just slowly becoming more and more popular, and more people are finding out about it.
Yeah, like, it's just a think about time, really, because like mainstream programs have been like that type of programs for so long, for since the start. And this LGBT, or like these gender neutral things and stuff like that, that it's just uh, that people are just starting to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously you can't like put in the face of the people like the things that they're not used to, because they won't accept it, they won't take it. Like,
Exactly, and there are so many different viewing demographics too, that it's often unfair how they measure things, because a lot of these shows, they don't start off on, say, a streaming service or something like that. They start off on mainstream television, and who's watching mainstream television still? It's normally, at least in North America, it's a lot of older people who still
yeah,
watch the mainstream television shows. Like, a lot of younger people have moved online to the internet or to the streaming services or alternate ways to get their media, and they're more binge watchers anyway. So for that that's still episodic, week by week waiting for it, you still have that older generation, and they're probably going to be the most resistant to a lot of in your face out there programming. Like, of course there's exceptions, but a lot of them still want their, NCIS or Law and Order SVU or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, and even if the and I think that the wrong thing to think about it is that like the people don't take these programs out of prejudice or hate
Yes.
or whatever. For example, my parents doesn't have any trouble with gay people or whatever people, but my mom is often when I'm talking to my cousin about like, oh yeah, I found this and just something curious like LGBTQ or with a gender conflict character or whatever. I'm talking to my cousin about that, and my mom is like, "Why do you always watch that programs?" Like, it's not that she has something against them. It's just like she finds it curious or peculiar that she feels that we watch only that. And it's so funny because it's like, yeah, it's not that I just watched that, it's that I just happened to find it and it's very interesting.
No, I think over time we're definitely going to see more of that type of media in the mainstream, and I think it is going to pick up, and I think it is picking up in popularity, and people are enjoying it more, and there's more to discuss. And but at the same time there is also always fandom, and there is so much more of that type of representation in fandom, largely because it is lacking in the mainstream, so that's often a very good way to find it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that this that it's slowly becoming more and more common. It's because the generation that it's becoming more and more like the main generation, like the ones that are working, the ones that are giving the money, the ones that are starting their families. It's the one that seeks out for this, and because it is starting to seek out for this generation that it's coming to from 25 to 35 and
Hmm.
something, it's more common for that generation to like identify themselves as queer or
Hmm.
to have queer friends or whatever.
Hmm.
And so they're like, why doesn't it shows on the TV? Because in older generations they didn't have this. It was like this really close thing, and like it almost was another world for them.
Yeah, or it just wasn't discussed or acknowledged in any
Yeah.
way. And so, like, even though, of course, that was happening, it was more on a subcultural level. And, like, there was that disconnect between those worlds where a lot of people just didn't know that stuff like this was going on, or that they had friends or even family who were queer, because it wasn't something that people felt comfortable coming out and discussing, because it wasn't the safest environment for it. And thankfully, even though it's still not a perfect environment, it is slowly becoming a safer environment to come out and be yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's more common now to come out, obviously it's more common to find like queer programming and queer media in general.
Hmm.
But of course, because like whether it's right or not, the the most common thing it's for heterosexuality. So of course it's more common for people to watch that,
Hmm.
to identify with that, and also because we have all or we have this older generation. Maybe in the future will be like super common to have queer programming and even and like heterosexual programming and whatever
Hmm.
in the same space. But right now it's obvious that it has to take its time. Like I was telling you, yaoi is kind of a new genre
Hmm.
because it started in the 70s, but like the other one starts like in the 20s or in the I don't know.
No, like
It's
way before, and they've had time to develop their tropes and stuff. And even those, like even the heterosexual tropes, are working their way through their own issues of cliches and all kinds of other things as they try and restructure for more, not modern's not quite the right word, but more contemporary demands of what people want to see.
yeah, like and the tropes and the cliche and all everything has to change with time because,
Hmm.
for example, one my cousin really likes like the shoujo
Yeah.
stuff or dorama or whatever, and she was watching Itasura no Kiss, like it's playful kiss. That's the Korean drama, I think, but whatever. And she was watching the anime first, and I just watched like a couple of episodes with her because I watched it, and the main character, the girl,
Hmm.
I she was so stressful. Like she was devoted totally to this guy, and she will do whatever the guy needed. And when the guy switched his major to medicine, she was like in arts, and she switched her major to no, to nursing and
Hmm.
things like that. She became a nurse because he was a doctor. It was like, this girl is annoying. But the manga came out in the 50s or in the
Hmm.
60s or something like that. So it was what it was expected for a girl to do. Like, your life was surrounding this.
Yeah, to chase your man. You do what you have to do to get that man, kind of, you know?
Yeah, like, and when she became a nurse, they were already married. But that's like the, yeah, you follow your husband
Hmm.
thing, and that's what that was right. That was the thing that you were supposed to do, and now it's not the case. And because I have more like a nowadays perspective, is like that girl's super annoying. Just
Do your own thing.
yeah, like, yeah, if you didn't like arts, it's fine, but if you like nursery, it's fine, but because of you, not because of him. Yeah, like, I get that, like, you have to change over time, because if you don't change the newer generations, you won't.
You won't
Well,
attract them because
yeah, exactly.
society is always changing. So it's equally important for media to grow and change, which I think it does naturally over time to match what audience expectations are. And as new people come into it, they automatically change what is produced. But it's also important to accept older works on their own terms contextually because of when they were made and because of who was working on them. It's not exactly fair to expect works from an older time to conform to our expectations now. It's perfectly fine to critique them and acknowledge the things that are wrong with them or that don't exactly match our current sensibilities. But at the same time, it's not always fair to condemn them on those terms because they're lots of times they are being quite progressive or working towards something different for their time, but they are still of their time. Every work is of its time. The only time a work is not of its time is in retrospect because you can only look back at it and see that it was ahead of its time from the future. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people get messed up. Like, they see these stories that are this that the current dynamic in Yaoi. I don't think it's gonna change really soon. Like Semeuka
Yeah.
thing or that Shota thing or whatever, and they're like, no, they're so messed up. But when you watch at it, it's like, no, that's just because they view things different. Like,
Hmm.
you kind of have to understand that each culture has its own approach to the same things.
Yeah, to relationships and how they play out and yeah,
Hmm.
you can't apply one standard unilaterally across all works. It just doesn't work.
No, no, for sure. Like, and even if you see how they handle things, not in fiction but in reality,
Hmm.
it's like, it's so different how we handle things here. So of course they will view like
Oh, no, because all cultures are different, even subtly so. Like, for example, with Canada and the States, we often get conflated with one another, and people assume our cultures are very similar. And in many ways, they are, but in many ways, they're also different. So, even in places that are so close and take cues from each other, you'll still find very different ways of viewing things and handling things. So, of course, the differences are even more pronounced when you're crossing, hemispheres and, entire continents.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, I totally get that. Like, I have seen, for example, my cousin is really lately, a couple of years, um, into Korean drama
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and I'm really into mainly Japanese media. So we kind of have this, we kind of see like, oh yeah, they're quite similar in these ways, but they have so much difference in these
Hmm.
other ways and stuff like that. And while you're examining like it from an outsider, entirely outsider um, view, and you're like, yeah, of course they get angry if you mix them up because they're
Yeah.
different. Like I'm like, yeah, for sure I wouldn't like for people, like I wouldn't be angry, but I wouldn't be comfortable either if people say that I'm Colombian or Guatemalan or whatever, no?
Hmm.
Because, and it's not because it's a bad thing, it's like, no, that's just not my culture.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think that that's like, I don't know how they view our media really, but I think I have seen that like in a lot of Mexican people at least. Like when my family watches, I show them some anime from Ghibli Studio
Yeah.
or well, that's more takeable because it's kind of kids for kids. But when I try to show them like something that it's really, because anime is not for kids, not all anime is for
No,
kids.
definitely
Uh,
not.
and when I show them something more for adults and things like that, it's like, what the hell's that? And it's like, why are they so weird? And I was like, no, they're not weird for them.
Exactly. It's just it's different.
Yeah, it's very fun though. Like my one of my mother's friends, like yeah, you're kind of obsessed with Japan. Like no, but it's like, and I'm always like, it's the same way that you like programming from Spain. You like going to Spain, and you like
Hmm.
these soap operas from Spain. That's the same thing. I just like soap operas from other places.
No, exactly. It's funny because it would be like if someone said like you're obsessed with American culture, and it's like, well, no, I just like it's a lot of what's produced and it's a lot of what's shipped towards you. Like it's not exactly hard anymore to get a lot of anime and to be exposed to that culture. And so it's natural that people will begin to develop more of an affinity for it as they become more and more exposed to it. Because
Yeah.
there is definitely more of it available now than there was when I was a kid. I still remember when I was in middle school, it was a big deal when we got our first rack of anime. It was literally a roll out rack that had 2 rows of manga on it, and that was the biggest deal. That was all the manga we most of us had ever seen in our lives. It was so it was such a small amount in comparison to what's available now.
No, yeah, for sure. Like, for example, here in Mexico in the 90s,
Hmm.
I think, uh, the programming was a lot of anime. You have like Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon
Yeah.
and Pokemon and Digimon and all the stuff. So when I was a kid, I didn't know it was anime for sure, and I was like, I just assumed that most of the cartoons were from Japan. Like, yeah, for sure. I don't know, but the cartoons come from Japan. After some time, it's because of the the cultural differences, the parents start to get worried about kids watching these things, and they stop, like they ask for the television to stop
Mm.
sending these things, and they stop. So in middle school, when I was like, a friend of mine like was really into cartoons in general,
Yeah.
and particularly into anime, so she was like, oh yeah, watch this and watch that, and I started watching it. But I remember that, in middle school, well, I was in a bilingual school, so I already speak like English,
Hmm.
but I was like, yeah, I need like this anime with subs in Spanish or English, and so often I wouldn't find it, and I would have to watch it like in Spanish from Spain,
Mm.
that it's awful for us to listen really. Sometimes I will watch it with subs in Italian that I don't really get that much, but it's kind of close to Spanish, so I could get the idea.
Hmm.
And it was not until, I don't know, in high school, in the last year of high school, I start like studying Japanese. So now I can, even like these obscure things that nobody can find, I can watch them. If I found them, I can
Mm-hmm.
watch them even if without subs. And it's much more easy because I remember like I would have to search for hours to find whatever episode I want to see
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger, and now it's super easy. You have these some anime on Netflix, so you have Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
You have even these like illegal places
Yeah.
that have like
That we shall not
a
mention.
huge, yeah, like we won't mention them, but
But they
they have
exist.
like a huge, yeah, and it's super easy now to get your anime in with the subs in that maybe not perfect, but but you at least have subs
Yeah.
in whichever language you want, and that's great. Like I have found that for some reason recently, like a year ago or
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, something, the Vietnamese subs start to get really popular. Like I will be like surfing or watching for something, and I will find it just with Vietnamese subtitles, and I was like, why? and and it happened to me so often that I was like, I think that in Vietnam anime it's getting really popular.
I have to go. It is that time. But
Okay.
but thank you so much. This was really fun and really interesting, and I hope you had fun too and get to talk
Yeah.
about Yaoi. And we stayed on topic for most of it, so I'm proud. So it's yeah, thank you for
No,
hanging
thank
out
you.
and chatting with me for this Fanversations.
No, thanks to you. It was really fun, and to see like other perspective in that subject, because like I told you, I'm not that I don't consume so much of the Western media,
Mm-hmm.
so it's hard to me sometimes to see the difference. I'm so used to these tropes that it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult. It's good to see another perspective. So thank you.
No, it was fun, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye. So, did you guys make it to the end? If so, as always, you are troopers. If you've made it all this way, let me know, what do you feel about BL as a genre? Are you into it? Not into it? Why not? Share all of your thoughts and feelings down below. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to tune in Tuesdays at 9 p.m. EST or around there, hopefully, if my daughter is asleep by that point, for the live stream, the weekly live stream. Random shipping fandom stuff every week. It's a lot of fun. As always, thank you for spending some time with me, and I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all of my patrons, names on the side. And be sure to head on over to vote and to get access to some of these Fanversations early. And of course, stay tuned as always, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.